Symmetrical all-wheel drive plus 34 mpg. Love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
There's a tension between our conscious values. We want to be colorblind, we want to be fair, and our unconscious feelings, behaviors, and actions.
A 1940s landmark study on race relations in the American South exposed the conflict between our national ideals and the realities of the Jim Crow era. 70 years later, segregation is outlawed. Have we actually left it in the past?
Exclusion, discrimination, we're not actually doing much better.
Our country was founded on equality, but does how we talk about race really reflect what we believe?
We actually created a test that measures bias.
Documentary filmmakers Llewellyn Smith, Christine Herby Summers, and Kelly Thompson explore race in America today. The truth goes deeper than black and white. American Denial. Now, only on Independent Lens. This program is made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
When we say we should live an examined life, what are we meaning? We're not saying an examined life is a happy life. We're just saying that we prefer an examined life even if it makes us unhappy, because at least we're learning the truth about who we are.
My general impression of human beings is that they are very confused in their mind. Their public opinions are certainly not their private opinions.
In the 1930s, a Swedish investigator, Gunnar Myrdal, was asked to conduct a 5-year examination of American life and values, trying to untangle America's longing for equality from its habits of racial domination.
The nose, the lips, the hair, the skin color still identifies people as somehow less than those who are obviously descended from the free. That doesn't go away when you end legal slavery.
We, as a nation, have been eager to put our ugly racial past behind us and to imagine that, all of that is history and everything is good now. We can exhale.
In 1944, Myrdal published an unsettling study of American society. He called it An American Dilemma. It was an exhaustive examination of the historical and psychological meaning of race in the life of the nation. The questions it raised still trouble us today. Could racism and egalitarianism be two sides of the same coin? Does racial oppression require cooperation across the color line? What if our faith in the American creed depends on the habit of denial?
If you take the idea of equality of opportunity, if you take the idea of fairness and justice, and you put those up against a reality, you have a conflict. Can you be in denial about these kinds of things indefinitely? Or at some point, do the stories you tell about yourself have to confront reality?
In 1938, a Swedish economist began one of the strangest journeys of his life. It wasn't his first time in America, but it was his first visit to the Deep South. He was trying to understand America as a civilization, how it worked, what it was. The foreign researcher's name was Gunnar Myrdal. He had grown to love America because of the timeless American values we embrace, even today.
There were these extraordinary ideals that he also shared. He felt very strongly about the ideals of equality, liberty, and freedom in the United States.
When Gunnar Myrdal arrived in the United States, he wanted to travel incognito in the South and do his research. Gunnar would just wander and talk to people. He would say to white people, "I'm from Sweden, and we don't have black people there. Tell me what they're like."
What he learned challenged everything he thought he knew about us.
He was completely unprepared for what he finds in the South, which is a society created by racial domination.
Southern white economic political elites congratulated themselves on having, quote unquote, solved the Negro problem by having segregated institutions where whites and blacks didn't come into contact with each other. He listened to all of this talk about gradual progress within the separate but equal framework.
It wasn't just attitudes toward blacks, it was actually structures, laws, behaviors.
It was a system of racial and social control that permeated every aspect of life.
Most people thought that I was an idealist. I felt, on the other hand, that ideals are real when they are held by human beings and when they are embodied in institutions like the American Constitution.
By 1938, the year of Myrdal's first trip south, America's racial problems were undeniable.
The Depression was hitting the black community in the northern cities much harder than anybody else. The rates of family breakup and poverty and welfare were skyrocketing in these communities.
The specter of social instability frightened white intellectuals. Race tensions were not exclusive to the South. Bloody white-on-black race riots had ripped through numerous cities.
They're worried about the possibility of social conflict. And so they think this is a problem for the entire society.
Could the right social investigator find a solution?
The Carnegie Corporation had the idea that what America needed was a broad study done by a scholar statesman. At first, they looked within the United States for such a person, but they never think about giving the study to a black American. It was inconceivable to them.
The Myrdals, Gunnar and Alva, are attractive to the Carnegie Corporation because, they've got a track record. They've got legal training, economics training, psychology training, and they've effected fairly radical transformations in Swedish society.
In Sweden, the Myrdals wrote a national study that sparked a government crusade for new policies that would support families and grow the population. By the 1930s, their ideas were shaping the formation of the modern Swedish social democracy.
So they're people that can take all of these studies and ideas that are happening within academia and actually use them to make a difference in society.
Gunnar and his wife Alva were more than husband and wife. They were also intellectual partners. They saw themselves as social visionaries.
Work was for him the main thing in the world, and Alva. And that filled him more than anything else. They had Swedish desks out of birch tree, and one was sitting on one side, the other at the other side. So they always could wink at each other or talk to each other. And he had a dialogue with Alva which never ended. He often talked about the United States. He had a tremendous love for America. Well, he thought they were more broad-minded than the Swedes.
Myrdal was brilliant, charismatic, self-confident.
I've never met anyone quite like him. He had a mind that could pull together disparate ideas and theories and ask all kinds of questions that other people weren't asking. He was fascinated by psychology, by sociology, by why people behave as they do.
In 1938, Myrdal accepted Carnegie's invitation and decided to come to New York. Alva came with the children to help launch the study. The remarkable work on race he later wrote for Carnegie, he would call an American dilemma.
Professor Myrdal, how did you come to write American Dilemma?
Well, that's a question. I got an invitation from the Carnegie Corporation, and first I thought this was very funny. But then I thought it over, and I came here. They wanted the foreigners to come here from a non-imperialistic country. Sweden certainly is. I had never before studied anything about the Negro problem.
To ask about the Negro problem is to ask about how blacks are a problem for whites. He can't bring himself to say that what he's interested in is the American civilization problem, but that's really what he's interested in. What is it about American civilization that has generated for us segregation, poverty, and the color line?
In Europe in the 1930s, you have the Jewish question, sometimes even called the Jewish problem, because they thought the problem was with the Jews. In the United States, people think of the problems that black people face as the Negro problem.
It's anything but a Negro problem. It's a condition produced fundamentally by exclusion, racism, discrimination, and the unequal distribution of resources. I think it's really hard to say. We're not actually doing much better on a lot of these questions about race, because the narrative is America gets better every day. Well, what if it doesn't? Like Myrdal, I think I discovered America by studying people at the margins. Why is it that we have this entrenched poor community that just can't participate in American society? When I started doing my work as a sociologist, I was obsessed with figuring out what was different about these black people. I wanted to understand poverty and inequality. So I constructed a survey. The first question on there, it was, how does it feel to be black and poor? And it was a list of 5 choices. Very good, good, very bad, bad, right? So people looked at me like I was crazy. Who asks ridiculous questions like these? They called me Julio, and they were wondering whether I was a scout working for Latino gangs who were going to take over their territory. And I eventually met the leader of their gang. He said, you know, if you really want to know what life is like, you gotta get closer to people. You gotta hang around with us.
Myrdal tried to get as close to people as he could. He later wrote, "I was shocked and scared to the bones by all the evils I saw, and by the serious political implications of the problem, which I could not fail to appreciate."
I don't think he was quite ready for the level of discrimination and threat of violence against the African American community. When he got to see this contradiction between the brutality and oppression on the one hand, and the seriousness with which Americans, both black and white, take the American creed on the other, he was sort of overwhelmed by how those two contradictory things could be in the same peoples at the same time. That these two things seemed to be in such violent contradiction with one another was really compelling to him. And it's one of the things that drove him to dive as deeply as he did in all aspects of race relations, black and white. But within the same individual, he had this conflict of openness to equality and democracy at the same time, a desire to oppress and humiliate.
He would have to try to reconcile the brutal, dehumanizing reality of Jim Crow with the rhetoric of the U.S. Constitution and the American creed.
The fact of the matter is that a substantial portion of the white population did feel this discomfort in the contradiction between these two phenomena of extreme racism on the one hand and the American creed on the other. So how can people reconcile themselves? And I think that one of the ways in which that contradiction is dealt with is through denial. Denial of discrimination, racism, and inequality in the society helps to maintain the stability of those societies. Because most people would prefer to believe that they live in a just and well-ordered universe and all is well with the world.
Gunnar came back to New York from the South in 1938, and he was completely depressed. And he said, "I can't do this myself. It's just too big, and it's too controversial." The Carnegie Corporation said, "No, you're the foreign observer. We brought you over here to look at this with fresh eyes, and that's what you're going to do. But of course, you can have a staff of American social scientists."
Myrdal's only black researcher on his second trip to the South is Ralph Bunche, who's a political scientist. And one of the interesting things about Ralph Bunche is that he is from Southern California. And in a way, he's an outsider too. So like Myrdal, he's coming into the South with fresh eyes.
But on the matter of the American creed, the two saw things differently. Myrdal thought of the American creed as a state religion. Bunche wasn't so sure.
Ralph Bunche told him straight out that white Americans have this mumbo-jumbo about rights and liberty and the American creed, and they utter it in a almost hypnotized way, but it doesn't affect their actual behavior. So Gunnar went back through the South in 1939. Ralph Bunche helped him to get access to communists, convicts on chain gangs, and the guards that watched over them. People who normally didn't talk to white social investigators. And they really had no idea what his perspective was. And so they were willing to answer this very earnest, energetic, boundlessly curious Swedish visitor who pretended not to have any knowledge of the subject.
He would ask them questions they were not used to. He was much more courageous than most of us would be in walking up to people and asking them about their lives.
Theodore Bilbo, the racist Mississippi senator, who introduced on the floor of the Senate a bill to send black people back to Africa, he talks about how it's important to keep the black people in their place, and it's important to make sure that they don't get too uppity. And Gunnar Myrdal, trying to provoke him, says, well, there's an easy way you could handle that. Why don't you just sterilize them? And even Bilbo says, oh, well, that would never go over in America. That would violate some fundamental rights that they have.
Bunch couldn't stay in the same hotel with Myrdal. Bunch was light-skinned, but he was black. He generally observed the segregation laws as he had to in order to do his research. He would often stay at the home of a doctor or some other middle-class person in the black community because there were no hotels for African Americans in many of these small southern towns. Myrdal conceded to me that, and I quote, "I was rather careless with Ralph's life." It was just in his nature to push to the edge of every situation. He talked to a woman, Mrs. Andrews, who was head of the very small white women's racist group. She was going on and on and on about all the young black men want is to rape white women.
And Myrdal listens and he listens and he listens.
And at one point he asked her, have you ever considered Freud's argument?
If you're obsessed with a thing, if you're afraid of a thing, that's the thing you really desire. And she thinks about it. And then she kicks them out of the house. And then she makes a report to the police, and they have to hightail it out of Georgia.
My father would go up to white segregationists, and he would ask them about their views, and he would say, isn't this rather like what's happening in Germany right now with the Jews? Oh, no. He would always sort of see that they would be shocked that you could even make a comparison like that. And then he would go closer and probe and say, well, what's so different exactly? The reality was that there were so many people who, on the basis of race, did not have the equality at all. He argued that there was a kind of opportunistic way of simply blocking out, of not seeing the reality, so that you could continue endorsing the ideals.
Our problem is that the new American dilemma isn't so simple. We have all of these markers by which we can demonstrate that we're not the people we used to be. But we don't know the ways in which we're not such good people because that part is unconscious. You may think this about yourself, but is that really who you are? We actually created a test that measures bias. You see words that capture good and bad. You have to associate Yankees with good and Red Sox with bad. This is very easy for a Yankee fan. But when you tell them to associate Yankee with bad and Red Sox with good, that's an impossible thing for them to do. They can't do it. They'll make mistakes. They'll take a lot longer to do it, and so on. Take a test like this and now just replace Red Sox and Yankees with the groups black and white. Imagine that for half the trials on this test, you have to associate black with good whenever you see a black face or a word like love, peace, joy, friend, all these good things. And while you're doing that, you have to put white and bad together, and words that mean terrible things in the world, words like agony, devil, bomb, vomit. How hard is that for you to do, is the question. We're not talking about your conscious attitudes. We're not talking about your conscious beliefs. We're talking about something that you yourself may not necessarily know you have. For something like 75% of white Americans, it's very hard to put black and good together.
There's a tension between oftentimes our conscious values. We want to be colorblind, we want to be fair, and our unconscious feelings, behaviors, and actions, and it's consequential.
We've done a study in Boston on a group that we thought was the purest group we could find. We had doctors take our test. Then the doctor encounters the face of a patient, and next to the patient are a bunch of symptoms that the patient reports, and these are cardiac symptoms. The doctor's decision is, should I prescribe thrombolysis, which is a clot-busting procedure, to this patient or not? And what we discovered was that the higher the anti-black bias in the doctor, the less likely that doctor was to prescribe thrombolysis to a black patient. What is remarkable about the study is that if you look at doctors' conscious bias, none exists. That's why the study is important, because it says that that conscious report doesn't predict that much about what you're going to do, right? But the unconscious does. And to the extent that it is predicting, we have evidence that this kind of bias is actually going to end up having impact on whether somebody lives or dies.
My general impression of human beings is that they are very confused in their mind. Their public opinions are certainly not their private opinions.
In 1941, Myrdal finally sat down to write his study of American race relations for Carnegie. Because of the war in Europe, Alva and the children remained behind in Sweden. The greatest challenge he now had to face was in himself. The impossible tension between his own beliefs and his own actions.
He's in the United States. He's confronting a foreign situation. He's very unsure whether or not he's going to be able to pull this gigantic project off. And his wife is beginning to question his commitment to the principles that they've agreed upon in their marriage.
Was Myrdal living the very kind of denial and hypocrisy he was investigating?
He was under critique from his wife. He had, in public, been an advocate of women's equality. But in private, he completely dominated the family.
He was very convinced of his stature. He called himself a genius, and he said a genius doesn't have time to listen so much to the children.
She's holding him up in these numbered letters, and I think there are 50 of them, all of his faults as a husband, and holding him up to her ideal of feminism. She's in effect renegotiating the relationship with her husband through these letters. Alva says, If I hadn't put your career first, I would have my PhD. I would be in Parliament now. Alva is not shy about using some of the same rhetoric that Black Americans use in holding him up to her standards.
Can you be in denial about these kinds of things indefinitely? Or at some point, do the stories you tell about yourself have to confront reality?
It triggers some kind of self-hatred and feeling that he can't go on. He believed that it was very damaging to an individual's mental health to try to live a lie or to try to hold these deeply incompatible views. He solves it by, quote, purging, which is a sort of layperson's understanding of psychoanalysis, that you have to get it all out.
In scores of letters, Gunnar confessed his shortcomings and pleaded for Alva to come and help. Besides Alva, the manuscript was now the most important thing in his life. What convinced Alva to come and help? Her commitment to their shared ideals, a belief that he could change, resignation, or simply love. As war raged across Europe, Alva left the children in Stockholm and made her way to New York to help Gunnar finish writing the Negro Study.
I was in school in Geneva, and the teacher said we should ask one of our parents about what was the happiest moment in his or her life. And then we should come and write a little essay of that. So I went to Gunnar, and I asked him. For a very long time he was thinking, and then he said, yes, it was when I was standing in New York and had my manuscript, and it was all ready, the manuscript of the American Dilemma. I had worked so much, I had put in my whole life in this, and now it was ready, and I had it in my portfolio. I was a bit astonished, you know, when you're 12, you would think he would say, oh, when I met your mother, or when I got my children.
It's funny, the first time I taught an American Dilemma, a young female student raised her hand and said, this sounds like the third world. Was this really occurring in America at the time? Did people really live like this? And I think there's just a sense of disbelief because you often feel you're being taken into a foreign land. Almost like a novel by Conrad. Let me guide you upriver as we go into this very distant land that's 7 blocks away from where you might be living at the time.
The reason he titled his book not American Racism, but An American Dilemma, is because he discovered that even then, even in the 1930s, that Americans were deeply conflicted.
Gunnar Myrdal made a pretty radical statement for the time when he said that the so-called Negro problem is really a white man's problem. It's a problem in the mind of the white American, in the institutions that white Americans control.
This basic conflict between American ideals and American reality is something that Frederick Douglass recognized. It's something that W.B. Du Bois recognized. Maybe they didn't listen well enough until it was something that was said by this Swedish expert from outside the country.
So the question is that still true of us? Can somebody still look at this country and say that that's true? And I think the answer is yes.
Even though we see people succeeding who have achieved a tremendous amount, and we say, well, if they made it, they made it, surely the rest of them ought to have made it. Surely it must be their own fault if they are trapped at the bottom.
To Myrdal, the beauty of the American creed was its insistence on equal opportunity and equal possibilities. But Myrdal also wrote that race prejudice was a function of the American creed.
And so what's happened is that the American creed is actually been used as a weapon against African Americans and poor people in this country. If you in fact accept the reality of the American creed as really describing the situation on the ground in American society, and you have a group that's not living up to expectations, then it must be because this group down here is inferior.
And I think this isn't just a phenomenon that goes on among white folks. It goes on in Black community as well, where Black folks say, well, if you just pulled up your pants, if you just stay in school, if you just act right. And it allows us to become blind to the structures that are in place that trap people at the bottom.
If you think that we are living in a state of equality, democracy, justice, fairness, then maybe the beliefs that you hold dear prevent you from seeing the reality of your social world.
So, for example, people say our criminal justice system isn't a system of racial control, it's a system of crime control. And if Black people would just make better choices, then they wouldn't have to worry about being locked up. But in poor communities of color today, you're born into a system in which you are going to wind up hopelessly stigmatized. You'll be stopped, frisked, searched. On the way to school, standing on the street corner waiting for the bus. You'll find yourself spread eagle, with or without reasonable suspicion or probable cause. And you soon get the message that no matter what you do, no matter whether you try to stay in school or whether you try to get good grades, whether you try to hang with the right kids, no matter what you do, you will be viewed and treated like a criminal.
The narrative before American Dilemma, in many ways, was that Blacks are not fit, that there's something defective biologically. But what we moved into today was a cultural narrative. And so it's not that Blacks are unfit as a population or species, but that the Black culture is not fit. Those people don't really belong. Those aren't the good Americans. They're not like us. And we very easily slip into that. If we're willing to extend the American creed and redefine it, are we connected across the color line? And for many Americans, the answer still is no.
I spent probably the formative period of my life in California. And my feelings when I got to California were that you were either blonde, blue-eyed, white, or you were just something other. I felt like I really didn't belong. It just felt as though there was just something called being white and being American.
Blacks, Latinos, other non-whites are coming into public space. What is that space? If it's not white, it's not an American space.
One night in my senior year, I was walking home late from a computer cluster where I'd been working on my senior thesis, probably 2 a.m. or something like that. And walking past a hall, just before I got to my dorm, coming wafting out of the air from 3 or 4 floors above, somebody shouted, "Nigger." Like that's it, just, "Nigger." Like, all right, okay.
The N word is really a way of saying you're the infinite other. You don't belong. You have a role, but your role is beneath us. And anytime you're in our space as a potential equal, it threatens our identity.
This is Princeton in the early 90s, so it's not as if it's the era of Jim Crow or anything like that. Fundamentally, I trusted the community at Princeton. I considered myself safe at Princeton.
Here you are in a prestigious institution. What are you doing here? What are you doing here in my space?
The ultimate challenge to ideas about who could inhabit public space came in 1954. That year, the U.S. Supreme Court desegregated America's public schools and outlawed racial discrimination.
The Supreme Court was arguing that segregation is psychologically damaging to African Americans, and so they cited Myrdal there.
The court's decision cited Myrdal's American Dilemma in footnote number 11, and they cited another study by black psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark that would forever be known as the Doll Study. The children were asked, which doll has the nice color? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll?
Black children were identifying the black dolls as ugly, the white dolls as beautiful, the white dolls as good, and the black dolls as bad. And then the children were asked, which one looks like you?
In 1947, 1 in 3 black children said the white doll looked like them. In some cases, children would refuse to pick either doll or start crying and run from the room.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
He's white.
And why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you?
How could we, after all of these years gone by, still have black children seeing themselves as ugly and bad? But it ought not be surprising, given the message that is fed to children today, that it's their people who are the bad ones. When stigmatized people believe there's no hope of escaping their stigma, they embrace it. In our poorest communities of color, where nearly everyone is being targeted, stopped, frisked, searched at early ages, where people are being criminalized, where that is the stigma, embracing your stigma as a means of survival, saying, yeah, you say I'm bad, you say I'm nothing, well, I say, yeah, I'm proud to be a criminal, I'm a gangster, that's right.
You cannot have a system of inequality existing as long as it has in the United States without blacks actually at some level cooperating and collaborating with that.
In the race test, if 75% of white Americans show a preference for white, then we would expect a similar mirror image with 75% of black Americans showing a preference for black. But that doesn't turn out to be the case. 40% of black Americans show a black preference, another 40% show a white preference.
And for me, the most disturbing examples of collaborating with others.
Donating the site on which our first public school was erected.
And after purchasing the land,
Leadstorf, San Francisco's first